Okay guys, so this is going to be your Loops Make startup code. This will help you start creating this activity. But before we actually download the startup code, let's try to explain and understand how sprites work on a canvas here on Thunkable. Okay, so for that, I'm going to start by creating a row. I'm going to just put a row on the screen. Okay, and then I'm going to put another row just right there on screen too. That way I have two rows. Now on the top row, I'm going to put the canvas, and the bottom row is going to be for the buttons. Now I'm going to make a slight modification to row 4, and I'm going to make it fit the contents. Okay, so it's going to fit the contents, and then I'm going to resize that content to the size that I want. Now I'm going to put a canvas right there on row 4 on the top. Okay, oops, that shouldn't go there. Let me just drag it and put it here better. That's it. Okay, so I have a canvas, and now for the canvas, I'm gonna put an absolute size of 450 more or less. That way I have the canvas and the row fits to that canvas. Now I'm gonna add some buttons on the bottom just so I can play around with the buttons, and it kind of like starts looking to the app that you guys saw on App Lab. Okay, I'm going to change the buttons over here. I'm just going to put, just so it looks very similar, I'm going to put color, and this button is going to be, I'm also changing the name and the variable. Okay, so I'm changing button for color, for location, of course. I'm also going to change it from here, location, and I'm also changing the third button, which is the shape, and I'm also going to change the fourth button to shape. Okay, so I have the 3 buttons and I have a canvas. Now remember that a canvas is just the workspace where I have all my sprites, etc. Okay, now let's click on blocks. As you can see on the left, I see the canvas of blocks. The canvas of blocks will work with events, motion, looks, and these are all the functions for the canvas, okay? Plus, we're gonna have some sprites that are going to be useful, okay? Now, we are gonna have a sprite type and a sprite, okay? So if I go to sprite, if I see my canvas number 2 right here, I see a sprite type. Automatically, I will see a tab that opens called Canvas. This new tab will allow me to make some modifications to this sprite over here. Now, on the app that we are working on, we are not going to use this little worm. We're going to use different shapes, right? So previously, on the startup code, you're going to have these sprites available for you on the screen. You're going to have all the sprites available. You're just going to have to code. Okay? So I'm going to add, as you can see, this is a sprite type. The sprite type is just an object where we're going to have several sprites. So let's say we have a worm, and the worm has different behaviors. So the worm can walk, the worm can jump, etc. Every time that I need a new image for that, I can create a new sprite. So I'm going to add a sprite, and this time I'm going to change the name of this sprite. I'm going to click on the sprite type, okay? And then I'm going to change for star, okay? Now this is going to be one of my shapes, and the shapes, the different sprites are going to be the colors of the shape. This is so you know how in the future we are going to change each sprite, or we're going to change to each different sprite, okay? So we're going to call it star. Oops. Okay. Stars. There you go. I'm going to change the name because the one that I'm going to give you already has star. Remember that you can't duplicate variables. And I'm going to add sprites. We can add another one called triangles. Okay. I'm going to add another one called hearts. Okay. And another one called circles. Okay, and we can play around with these 4 different sprites. Now they're all worms, but we need the actual image. Now, if I click on my sprite type, for example, stars, I can add different types of stars. Now, each of those images will be stored in a list, okay? It will be a list of pictures. So let's say that the list is going to be called stars, and that list of pictures will hold each of the sprites, okay? So now you guys are going to be able to see all the different pictures that are available, okay? So we're going to create, if we're going to do the star, we're going to have star green, then I'm going to add star red, then star orange, then we have star magenta, and you can make as many colors as you want, okay? Star blue, and that's about it. And I'm going to erase the worm because I'm not going to need it. So from stars, I have 5 options of stars. Remember that this is a list where this is the first position, second position, third position, fourth, and fifth position. If I move and drag the star to a different position, it will change the order of the list. Okay? Now I have this star right over here. Okay, now let's go to our block tab and let's see how this works. Now the first thing we're going to do is try to understand what variables. You might have noticed that you need several lists to develop your app. One of these lists is a list of stars. Now, how many stars are you creating on the app? Well, if you count them, and if you see on the App Lab, there are around 20 different stars. So for that, we're going to need to create a list of 20 different stars. And each star will be a different color, okay? So let's try to think about that. And let's start with that list of stars. And we're going to put them in the canvas. So I'm going to start by creating a variable. Remember that I can initialize a variable called stars list, okay? And this stars list, I'm going to initialize it to an empty list. Okay, that's the first thing I got to do in order to work with a list. Then I am going to start populating this list in various forms like we did before on the practice activity. But when do we do this? We go to the canvas block, we go to events, and we're going to say that when canvas 2 loads, and we're talking about when this canvas loads, when you open the app, what's going to happen? Well, the first thing we need to do is to populate the list with stars. That's very simple. From the canvas block, as you can see, there's a tab called add and remove. Okay? Now, I'm not going to put it there right now. I'm just going to put it right out here because we're going to need to modify a couple of things. Now, every time that you create a new object of stars or a new sprite, it's going to ask for a couple of things. The position in X, the position in Y, where the sprite is going to be located. Then there's a component that I can use, which is the object, and that object I can modify a couple of different things, like the height, like the width, etc. Okay? Because as you know, on the app there are different sizes of stars or different sizes of shapes. So let's start by creating a random number, because we're going to need a random number because we don't see the stars always in the same spot. In order to create a random number, you just need to go to the math palette and grab the integer, the random integer. You're going to say that it's from 1 to 100. Well, you need to play around with the pixels. The canvas of a cell phone can go between 10 and probably 300 pixels. Depending on your cell phone, this might vary. Now I'm going to duplicate this block, and I'm also going to randomize from 10, but since this is the height or the y-axis, I'm going to say that it's about 500. So now the star that I'm going to create will be located in this position. So that's the first thing. But then after this, after the star is created, what am I going to do? I need to store this star into a list of stars. Okay? Before we store the star in the list, let's change some other parameters of this star. So I'm going to go to looks. I'm going to see that there are some functions that allow me to change the height and the width. So first, I'm going to set the sprite, okay, or stars. I'm going to set not the sprite one, the component, which is the star that I'm creating, and I'm going to change the height, okay? Now the height has to be random again. In order to create a random number, and I don't have to like do it over and over again, I just want to generate it every time, I can create two variables, one variable for the height and one variable for the width, okay? In this case, I can just duplicate the random integer, okay, for the height, and I'm gonna say that the height can be between 5 and let's say 70 pixels. So I'm changing the height of that star. But if I don't change the width, it's gonna be very, very weird how it's gonna show on your computer. So I'm gonna duplicate this, and I'm gonna set this time the width also to a random integer between 5 and 70. Now what I'm doing is that I'm just creating a sprite, okay? I'm creating a star in a certain location, and that star is a component that I can use and set the height and the width. Another cool feature to create your sprite that it's available, it's the opacity, okay? Now let's look for the opacity of the component. So we're going to set the height, and we also have an option called opacity. I'm going to just grab the component, and the opacity, I'm going to make it also a random integer that goes from, of course, 1 to 100%. Okay, this goes in percentage, so you can say that it goes from 1 to 100. Or if you don't want a complete transparent star, you can just add it from 50 to 100%. Okay. Okay, now it's time to put the star in the list and add it in a particular number. Okay, so I'm going to go to list, and I'm going to look for insert at. We've done this before, so we're gonna enlist. What list? The list that I created called star list. Okay, and in this list, I'm going to insert it at the last position and as the component that I just created. Okay, so I just added this component, and here's the tricky part. Every time that you create a star, you want to, since you want to use different colors of that star, and those colors are the different sprites, what you want to do is that you want to set the next image number. So, how many stars are there? Well, there's an image number. We're going to go to the design so you can see it better. Let's click on the canvas. Okay, as soon as I get the tab, I can see that the stars, if I click on this sprite, I have 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. So I have 5 different stars. So I need a random number because each of them is in a different position. So I'm going to go to blocks, and I'm going to set the component, okay, I'm talking about the stars, image number 2, and I'm going to have a random number, a random integer, from 1, because it's 1 position, all the way to the 5th position. Okay, so we have 5 stars. Those are the possibilities. So I'm going to set the image number to a different position. So every time that I create a star is a different color star. This is very important. Now, this is how I created one single star. If I put this on the canvas and I click on run, when I open the canvas, I'm just going to create one star. Okay. If I click on design and I click on preview, I'm going to get probably 1 star. You see? one star, and this one is from a, maybe we created another. Yes, so that's the next one that was coming, okay? So I just created one of them, and this was the next one that it's coming for our next star. So let's go back to our blocks. And how many stars do we need to create? We need to create 20. So for that, I am going to use a for loop. I'm going to go to control. Since I know how many stars I need, I can use the repeat block, and I'm going to say that it's 20. And every time that I repeat, I will create a new star in the last position. Remember that lists can insert at last or at the beginning, okay? Or in between. So every time that this iteration repeats, I'm putting a star at the end. And then I'm putting a new star. So if I run this program, I will see all my stars, okay? So as you can see, all the stars are randomly placed around the canvas and they have a different color. Now this color is because there's a random number from 1 to 5 that chooses the different stars. Okay? Now we can do that with each of them. Now your job is going to be to add all the other shapes, but before that, we are going to explain how to use the color and the location button. Well, you already know how to activate an event using a button. So let's go to the blocks, and what we're going to do is that we're going to look for the button color, and let's try to change the colors of these stars, okay? Okay, so remember that a list, it's a list of items. Each item has a position. In order to change the color of each of those items, we just need to use the set image number so we can change to different colors, but we need to traverse the list. We need to iterate through the list. So for that, remember, we always use a loop, okay? I'm going to go to control, and I'm going to use a loop that you've used before where we can count with I from 1 all the way to the length of our list, okay? Remember that we can find the length of our list by clicking on list on the list palette, and we're going to look the length of, okay, I'm going to take this off, and we are going to put the length of our list where we have it in variables, okay? So this is the length of our list. Now we are going to put it right here as the end of our iteration, so it's going to go to 1 to whatever size of our list that we have. And we're going to increase it by 1. So it's going to go to every single position. Now remember, I is going to go 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, etc. until the end or the number of elements in that list. So in the first position, what I need is to change the image number. So I'm going to set the image number. Okay. Now there are some things that we're going to change. Now I'm going to set, not the sprite, I'm going to set whatever is the variable in this position. Okay. So I'm going to get the value or the star in that position. So I'm going to go to list, and I'm going to say that in list I'm going to get, okay, I'm going to take this away. So in list, what list? The variable start list. In list, I am going to get the number, the number I, because I'm going to iterate. So I'm going to look at every single position of my list. So I can see I as a variable now, and what's going to happen is that it's going to take the star in the first position and change it to a random number. Okay? Every time that this happens throughout the whole array, the program is going to change to a different color, or it's going to change to a different sprite. Okay? Okay, so in this case, let's see how it should work. So after all the different lists are created, we're gonna have all the shapes. You guys are gonna be able to do this. And when we have the stars completed, when you guys have all the stars completed, you're gonna click on colors and you're gonna be able to see that all the colors change. Okay? So that's what we need to do in this program. Now it's your task to change the location. As you can see, when I click locations, the stars change. And when I click on shapes, there are some new shapes that are created. Okay? Hearts, triangles, and stars again.